I'm Kate. I'm a history student at Cambridge and an aspiring historian. In the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, speaking about the future, education, and university may seem difficult. Like probably many of you, I'm speaking to you all from my home in lockdown. But it is so important in hard times to think about what you really want to do with your life and with your future. When I was in sixth form, I decided to apply for an English degree. I had the most amazing, inspirational English teacher, and she encouraged me to aim high. I got a place at the University of St Andrews in Scotland. I'd always wanted to do my undergraduate degree in Scotland, as it is a 4-year flexible course. So flexible, in fact, that in my second year I switched to history. I'd always loved history when I was young. I was dragged around castles as a child by my dad, and my granddad's favourite topic of conversation was always either Henry VIII or the First World War. In my undergraduate degree, I studied a range of British and European history, ranging from the reforms of Emperor Justinian I to the Frankish Empire, the 13th century Scottish Wars of Independence, the English Reformation, the Scottish Reformation, Elizabeth I, Mary, Queen of Scots, and the daily lives of early modern men and women in Europe, with the trials of work, apprentices, marriage, childbirth, and death. I also took an interest in German history, studying the politics and mind of Kaiser Wilhelm II, who dragged Europe into war in 1914, and the struggle for independence for Eastern Europe in the interwar period. My primary interest area, however, was firmly established by my fourth and final year in St Andrews, 16th century Scotland. In particular, I was fascinated by the royal spectacles of the Scottish court under James V, King of Scots, and Mary, Queen of Scots. Accounts of pageants, festivities, and plays designed by the court poet Sir David Lindsay in the 1530s dazzled my imagination. I'd always been interested in theatre as well as history, and this intersection between the two was fascinating. I quickly began to see these festivities as more than just an elaborate show. Displayed in front of ambassadors from France, England, Denmark, the Low Countries, and the papacy, these festivities acted as an important diplomatic channel from the Scottish court extending out all across Europe. Even the order in which the ambassadors were served their dinner and by which nobles was used to indicate favour and international policy. If the French ambassador got his dinner first, surely there was now to be another Scottish treaty with France. It was at this point that I began to seriously consider a career as a historian. My supervisor at St Andrews had done her PhD at Cambridge under Dr. Claire Jackson, and she recommended that I reach out to her about the possibility of doing a master's at Cambridge. And the rest as well, history. I applied for a master's in early modern history at Trinity Hall and was accepted. My studies at Cambridge have focused on both historical theory and early modern society and politics. We have studied a range of approaches to take to history, such as looking at archives, global history, power and belief in the early modern world. One of the most phenomenal classes I've taken has been in the early modern book. Our class had the chance to examine in real life books which were over 500 years old, their pages turned by hundreds of people before us, their words read by clerks, lawyers, and kings. We learnt how early modern books were printed and bound, and their lives as vital objects in the early modern world. Our class was held in the atmospheric Pern Library in Peterhouse. The historic panelling of the library and the treasures held in them allowed us to really imagine being in 16th century Cambridge. We were students reading for our classes as other countless did before us. This term, I have begun a class in language and power in the early modern world, focusing on the hidden world of rumour, gossip, and misinformation. This topic is really well suited for my dissertation at Cambridge. My dissertation is on that same topic which I began to love so much at St Andrews, Scottish court festivities, projections of Scottish royal power in the festivities of the adult rules of James V, King of Scots, and Mary, Queen of Scots, in the 1530s and 1560s. The princely culture of early modern Scotland has been severely understudied, but where it has concrete links between early modern culture and diplomacy have not been made clear. I am researching this aspect of early modern power and the ways in which Scottish monarchs projected visions of their majesty, both to a Scottish and an international audience. Mary, Queen of Scots, in particular, has often been characterised as vain, foolish, and as one Scottish reformer, John Knox, said, far too much obsessed with parties and shoes. I hope that my comparative study of Mary and her father, James V, will in fact demonstrate that Mary was far from a frivolous ruler, but a calculated political operator, who, like her father, used court festivities to reinforce her own power both at home and abroad, and send a powerful message to both her allies and enemies that they meant business. My master's dissertation will, I hope, naturally lead into my PhD study, which will focus on James V's foreign policy aims during the 1530s. I hope that my work on diplomacy within James V's court will help inform a broader study of Scotland's role in Europe in the mid-16th century. Scotland was, in the 1530s, at the centre of European diplomacy. Faced with the heretical Henry VIII in England, Scotland was the last beacon of Catholicism in Great Britain. Europe looked to James V as both the true Catholic ruler, but also as Henry VIII's heir, as James V was Henry VIII's nephew. There has never been a study of James V's foreign policy aims, and I hope at the end of my PhD to write a book on James V. There's only been one modern biography of James, and this mainly focused on internal politics. I think that's what I find most fascinating about history. Not simply that you learn so much about other people's lives, loves and fears, but there is still so much to discover. To work from archives, letters, account books, to understand what people were thinking and why they were acting in the ways that they did. History is at its root about understanding what mattered to people in the past, and to a certain extent, trying to understand how that impacts the present and the future. So when you're thinking about what you want to do in the future, I would urge you to look first to the past. What did you always play with when you were little? What places did your parents drag you around? Or what books could you never put down? For me, it all came down to history. Dressing up as knights, creating characters in the past, visiting castles, and my head buried in books about the Tudors. The most important thing, I think, is strangely not to overthink it. And if you change your mind, don't stress it. The thing you love and the thing you always want to do is just right in front of you. You just might not realize it yet.